legally erased Prince Harry from the nation of his birth was not signed in a palace. It was not signed by a royal courtier, or a privy councillor, or a member of the House of Windsor. It was signed at 9:14 am on a wet Tuesday morning in London, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of the Home Secretary, on the 4th floor of the Home Office building on Marsham Street. The document was a deprivation order. It was printed on heavy, watermarked government paper. It contained 3 paragraphs of dense, unyielding statutory language, and at the bottom, beside the seal of the Home Office, the Home Secretary uncapped his fountain pen, signed his name, and dated the page. In that quiet, bureaucratic moment, Prince Harry was not merely removed from a royal registry. He was formally, legally, and permanently stripped of his status as a British citizen with the right of abode. He was, in the eyes of the British state, rendered an alien. The palace confirmed the change at precisely noon. The statement was released not through a grand press conference, but via a single terse bulletin posted to the royal family's official website. It read, "The Privy Council has formally noted the deprivation order executed by the Home Secretary under the provisions of the British Nationality Act 1981 and the constitutional precedents of the Act of Settlement 1701. Consequently, the Duke of Sussex's status as a British subject with automatic right of residency has been permanently revoked, and his name has been formally excised from the constitutional line of succession." To the casual scroller on social media, it looked like a legal clean-up, a final dusty piece of administrative debris swept away after years of transatlantic drama. But to the constitutional lawyers, the intelligence officers, and the royal insiders who understand the brutal architecture of the British state, the statement was a seismic shock. Because the Home Secretary does not strip a prince of the blood of his citizenship as a punishment, he does it because the prince has already, legally and irrevocably, stripped himself. Before we reconstruct the secret meeting in a Zurich hotel room that triggered this constitutional guillotine, before we reveal the multi-million-dollar foreign commercial contract that forced Harry's legal team to swear an oath of allegiance to a foreign power, and before we walk through the agonizing moment Harry stood at a UK border checkpoint and was handed a visa slip like any other tourist, make sure to hit subscribe to Crown Watch and turn on the notification bell. Because this story is not about a family feud, it is not about a brother's revenge or a father's disappointment. It is about the cold, unforgiving arithmetic of global commerce, the ancient trapdoors of constitutional law, and the moment a prince realized that in his desperate attempt to build a financial fortress to protect his family from the institution, he had accidentally locked himself out of his own country forever. To understand why the Home Secretary signed that order, we must first discard the public myth that Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life was a simple matter of packing bags and moving to California. The public narrative is that they stepped back, signed a few media deals, and lived happily ever after. The reality is vastly more complex, vastly more expensive, and fraught with existential legal peril. When Harry and Meghan established their commercial empire, they were not just making documentaries. They were building a multinational corporate structure, RQL Productions, RQL Philanthropies, and a web of subsidiary holding companies that generates tens of millions of dollars in global revenue. And as that empire grew, it attracted the attention of entities far larger and far more complex than American streaming giants. 18 months ago, Harry's legal and financial advisors were approached by a sovereign wealth fund backed by a major Middle Eastern state. The proposal was staggering, a $400 million joint venture to produce a global slate of documentary films, cultural heritage projects, and strategic media partnerships. It was the kind of deal that would secure the Sussex family's financial independence for 3 generations. It was the ultimate shield, but there was a catch, a massive, legally insurmountable catch. Under the UK's National Security and Investment Act, any commercial venture involving a British citizen of high constitutional standing and a foreign state-backed entity must undergo rigorous, months-long screening by the Cabinet Office and MI5. The British government would have the power to veto the deal, freeze the assets, or impose crippling operational restrictions to prevent foreign state influence over a member of the royal family. Harry's Beverly Hills legal team, led by a ruthlessly pragmatic international corporate attorney named Julian Vance, ran the risk assessment. They knew that if the UK government reviewed the deal, it would be dead on arrival. The optics of a British prince taking $400 million from a foreign sovereign wealth fund would trigger a political firestorm in Westminster. The deal would be blocked, the fortress would not be built, so Vance devised a loophole, a legal manoeuvre so aggressive, so structurally absolute, that it would bypass the UK's national security screening entirely. The strategy was to legally reclassify Harry, not as a British prince, not as a UK domiciled citizen, but as an independent foreign commercial principal. To achieve this reclassification under international corporate law, Harry had to establish a legal nexus outside of British and American jurisdiction. Vance arranged for the creation of a specialised holding trust in a jurisdiction that offered absolute corporate secrecy and diplomatic commercial shielding. But to serve as the sole director and beneficiary of this shielded trust, and to legally bind the contract with the Foreign Sovereign Wealth Fund, Harry was required to sign a specific document, a document provided by the foreign state's legal representatives. It was called a Declaration of Commercial Allegiance and Principal Agency. Let me break down what that document actually meant, because its contents are the hinge upon which Harry's entire citizenship now hangs. The declaration was not just a contract, it was a sworn oath. To bypass the UK's foreign investment screening, the document required Harry to formally declare, under penalty of international perjury, that he was acting exclusively as an agent of the foreign commercial entity, that he surrendered his right to invoke British diplomatic protection in any commercial dispute, and that he pledged his fiduciary and operational allegiance to the foreign state's corporate governance board. In the language of international law, it was a commission. Harry was accepting a formal, binding commission from a foreign power. Harry signed the declaration on a Thursday evening in a glass-walled boardroom in Zurich. He signed it with the digital pen provided by the foreign state's legal team. He signed it because it unlocked the $400 million. He signed it because it built the fortress. He signed it because his lawyers told him it was a standard piece of international corporate boilerplate, a necessary fiction to shield his assets from British tax and security interference. What his Beverly Hills lawyers did not understand, what they had entirely failed to research because they were experts in American corporate tax, not 18th century British constitutional law, was that in the United Kingdom, accepting a commission or swearing an oath of allegiance to a foreign power is not just a corporate fiction. It is a constitutional trigger. And the trigger had just been pulled. The discovery was made 3 weeks later, not by the palace, but by the Signals Intelligence Directorate at GCHQ, which routinely monitors the financial communications of foreign state-backed entities for national security threats. When the $400 million transfer was initiated, the accompanying legal metadata was flagged by an automated algorithm. The algorithm recognized the digital signature of the Duke of Sussex attached to a declaration of commercial allegiance to a foreign state. The file was immediately escalated from GCH5 and from MI5 to the Cabinet Office's Constitutional and Security Secretariat. The Secretariat's legal advisors opened the file on a Monday morning. They read the declaration, they read the oath of fiduciary allegiance, they read the surrender of British diplomatic protection, and then they pulled down a dust-covered volume from the library shelf, the Act of Settlement 1701, cross-referenced with the British Nationality Act 1981. The legal opinion they drafted over the next 48 hours was 12 pages long, and its conclusion was devastating in its simplicity. Under the ancient provisions governing the line of succession, any heir to the throne who swears allegiance to, or accepts a commission from, a foreign power without the explicit, written consent of the sovereign automatically forfeits their place in the succession. Furthermore, under Section 40 of the British Nationality Act, a citizen who has formally pledged allegiance to a foreign state in a manner deemed seriously prejudicial to the vital interests of the United Kingdom can be deprived of their citizenship, provided they hold another nationality and will not be rendered stateless.
Harry held a US passport through his wife's domicile and his own naturalization pathways. He would not be stateless.
The trap was perfectly, legally, inescapably set. William received the Cabinet Office briefing at Highgrove on a Friday evening. He sat in his private study, the fire burning low in the grate, and read the 12-page opinion. He read the transcript of the Zurich signing. He read the text of the oath Harry had sworn to the foreign. And William, who has spent his entire adult life trying to build a firewall between the monarchy and the chaotic, unpredictable actions of his younger brother, felt a profound, chilling sense of finality. This was not a scandal that could be managed by a PR team. This was not a tabloid leak that could be denied. This was a constitutional fact. Harry had, with his own hand, sworn allegiance to a foreign power to secure a corporate payday. He had committed the exact act that the founders of the British Constitution had written the Act of Settlement to prevent. William picked up the secure phone and called the Cabinet Secretary.
He did not ask for leniency. He did not ask for a cover-up. He asked a single, precise question. Is the deprivation of his citizenship mandatory or discretionary? The Cabinet Secretary replied, "The forfeiture of his succession rights is automatic and mandatory under the Act of Settlement. The deprivation of his citizenship under the Nationality Act is discretionary, but the Home Secretary is legally bound to execute it if the intelligence services deem the Foreign Commission a threat to national security." Given the Sovereign Wealth Fund's ties to foreign state intelligence, MI5 has already recommended the deprivation. The Home Secretary will sign the order on Tuesday. William hung up the phone. He looked out the window at the dark Gloucestershire sky. He did not feel triumph. He felt the heavy, settling weight of institutional survival. The spare had not just left the building, he had legally defected. And the state was simply processing the paperwork. Charles was informed on Saturday morning. The King was at Sandringham, walking the grounds with his dogs, when his private secretary handed him the red leather folder containing the Cabinet Office opinion and the draft deprivation order. Charles stood in the damp morning air, the wind whipping off the Norfolk coast, and read the document. He read the words his son had signed in Zurich. I pledge my fiduciary and operational allegiance. Charles closed the folder. His hands, which had trembled when he signed the protection withdrawal, which had wept when he signed the Windsor banishment, were perfectly still now. Because this was not a punishment he was inflicting. This was a consequence his son had chosen. Charles looked at his private secretary and asked quietly, Did he know? Did he know what this document meant for his country? The private secretary, who had reviewed the intelligence intercepts of Harry's legal team, shook his head. No, Your Majesty. His American lawyers viewed it purely as a corporate shield. They did not understand the constitutional implications of the oath. He did not know he was signing away his citizenship. He thought he was just securing a contract. Charles closed his eyes. The tragedy of it was absolute. His son had not betrayed his country out of malice. He had betrayed it out of ignorance. He had traded his birthright not for a bowl of pottage, but for a corporate tax shield and a $400 million media deal. And the law, blind and unfeeling, did not care about the ignorance. It only cared about the ink. The Privy Council must assent to the deprivation, Charles said, his voice barely above the sound of the wind. The Home Secretary cannot execute the order without the Sovereign's formal recognition of the succession forfeiture. I must sign the assent. The Private Secretary nodded. It will be done on Tuesday, Your Majesty. You will not have to be in the room. The Lord President will process the assent. Charles shook his head. No, I will be in the room. He is my son. If the state is stripping him of his country, I will look at the paper that does it. I will not hide from it. The Privy Council meeting took place on Tuesday morning at Buckingham Palace. It was a closed emergency session. Charles, the Lord President, the Home Secretary, and the Attorney General. The atmosphere in the room was suffocatingly quiet. There were no cameras, no press, just the ancient, heavy machinery of the British state grinding into motion to sever one of its own. The Home Secretary presented the deprivation order. He explained the MI5 assessment. He explained the National Security and Investment Act. He explained that the Foreign Commission compromised the Duke of Sussex's ability to hold a British diplomatic passport, to receive sovereign protection, or to remain in the line of succession. The Attorney General confirmed the legal precedent. The Act of Settlement is absolute, Your Majesty. By swearing allegiance to a foreign commercial entity tied to a foreign state, the Duke has alienated himself from the Crown. He is, in the eyes of the Constitution, a foreign principal.
The Home Secretary's deprivation order is the only lawful mechanism to align his statutory citizenship with his constitutional reality. Charles looked at the document. He looked at the blank space at the bottom where the Home Secretary would sign, and the space beside it where the sovereign's assent would be registered. Charles picked up his pen. He did not weep. He did not hesitate. He signed his name. Charles R. The King had assented to the stripping of his son's citizenship. The Home Secretary then signed his own name. The order was executed. The machinery had finished its work. The palace confirmation was released at noon. The media explosion was instantaneous. The tabloids screamed about treason and exile. The broadsheets ran frantic legal analyses of the British Nationality Act.
The American cable news networks ran panels debating whether the British government was weaponizing citizenship.
But inside the glass-walled boardroom in Beverly Hills, where Harry and his legal team were watching the news break, there was no debate. There was only a cold, suffocating panic. Julian Vance, the architect of the Zurich deal, stared at the palace statement on his monitor. He pulled up the text of the British nationality. He pulled up the Act of Settlement. He read the clauses regarding foreign oaths and commissions, and the colour drained from his face. He turned to Harry, who was sitting at the head of the table, staring at his phone as the notifications flooded in. "Harry," Vance said, his voice stripped of its usual corporate smoothness. "We made a mistake. A catastrophic mistake. The Declaration of Commercial Allegiance. It wasn't just a corporate shield, it was a constitutional tripwire. By signing it, you legally swore allegiance to a foreign power. You triggered the Act of Settlement. They aren't just removing you from the line of succession. They're revoking your citizenship." Harry looked at his lawyer. The silence in the room was absolute. "What does that mean, Julian? What does revoking my citizenship actually mean?" Vance swallowed hard. "It means you have no right of abode. It means your British passport is invalid. It means if you want to enter the United Kingdom, you have to apply for a visa. You have to go through border control. You have to be stamped in. And if they decide you are a risk to national security, which given the Foreign Wealth Fund they might, they can deny you entry. You are an alien, Harry, in the country where you were born." Harry's reaction was not fury. It was a profound, disorienting shock. He had spent the last 4 years criticising the institution, dismantling its reputation, and building a life entirely separate from its constraints. He had believed that his British citizenship was an unassailable fact, a biological and geographic certainty that no palace bureaucracy could touch. He had believed that he could leave the monarchy, but keep the country. He had believed that the passport in his drawer was a right, not a privilege. And now, in a single stroke of a Home Secretary's pen, the country had left him. The border had been drawn, and it had been drawn right through his own identity. "Can we undo it?" Harry asked, his voice tight. "Can we rescind the declaration? Can we tell the Foreign Fund it was a mistake?" Vance shook his head slowly. "If we rescind the declaration, we breach the contract with the Sovereign Wealth Fund. They will sue for the return of the $400 million plus damages. It will bankrupt Arkwell. It will freeze your personal assets. And worse, if we admit to the UK government that the oath was a sham, we open ourselves up to criminal charges for perjury and fraud under the National Security and Investment Act. We are trapped, Harry. The shield is locked, and the key is on the outside." The reality of the deprivation order began to manifest in physical, bureaucratic ways almost immediately. 3 weeks after the palace confirmation, Harry's UK diplomatic passport was formally cancelled by the Foreign Office. A letter arrived at his Montecito home, delivered by Standard International Courier, requesting that he return the document to the passport office in Liverpool within 14 days. Harry held the dark blue gold-embossed booklet in his hands. He opened it. He looked at the photograph of himself taken years ago, when he still wore the uniform, when he still stood on the balcony, when he still believed the world was shaped by the blood in his veins. He placed the passport in a padded envelope, filled out the return slip, and handed it to his mail clerk. He was mailing his country back. But the true weight of the stripping did not hit him until he actually tried to cross the border. 2 months after the deprivation order, Harry needed to travel to London for a previously scheduled high-stakes commercial negotiation regarding the distribution rights of his latest documentary. It was a routine business trip, or it would have been before Zurich, before the oath, before the ink. Harry flew into Heathrow Airport on a commercial first-class cabin, having abandoned the private charter route to avoid the optics of arriving as a foreign dignitary when he no longer held the status. He walked through the terminal, his baseball cap pulled low, his security detail trailing at a discreet distance. He approached the border control hall. For his entire life, he had been ushered through the very important person diplomatic corridors, his passport stamped by a discreet officer in a quiet lounge. Now he joined the queue for all other passports. He stood in line behind businessmen, tourists and students. He waited for 45 minutes. The physical reality of his new status was a slow, grinding humiliation. He was no longer a prince of the realm. He was a queue number. When he finally reached the desk, he handed the Border Force officer his dark blue United States passport. The officer took it. He scanned the biometric chip. The screen on the officer's terminal flashed red, then amber, then settled on a highly restricted green. The system recognized him, not as HRH Prince Henry, but as Harry Sussex, US citizen, subject of Deprivation Order 44B, flagged for secondary assessment. The officer looked up. His expression was perfectly neutral, trained to show no recognition, no deference, and no hostility. "Purpose of your visit to the United Kingdom, sir?" Harry looked at the officer. He looked at the uniform. He looked at the royal crest emblazoned on the wall behind the desk, the crest of his ancestors, the crest he had fought to defend, the crest that was now legally indifferent to his presence. "Business meetings," Harry said, his voice quiet. "And visiting family?" The officer typed the information into the terminal. "How long will you be staying?" Harry said, 5 days. The officer nodded. He reached under the desk and pulled out a small white rectangular slip of paper, a leave to enter visa slip. He stamped it with the date, wrote 5 days, business visit in black ink, and slid it across the counter. You are being granted limited leave to enter for 5 days, the officer said, his voice flat, reciting the statutory script. You are not permitted to undertake any employment, paid or unpaid, within the United Kingdom. You are not permitted to access public funds. You must leave the country on or before the expiration date stamped on this slip. If you overstay, you will be subject to detention and removal. Do you understand these conditions? Harry stared at the white slip of paper. Not permitted to access public funds. Subject to detention and removal. This was the language used for illegal immigrants, for overstayers, for people who did not belong. And it was being spoken to him in his own country by an officer wearing the Crown's badge. "I understand," Harry said. He took the slip. He took his American passport. He walked through the gate. He was in the United Kingdom, but he was no longer of it. The psychological impact of that border crossing cannot be overstated. For 39 years, Harry's identity had been inextricably linked to the soil of the island. He was the soldier. He was the son. Even when he raged against the institution, even when he fled to California, he did so with the unspoken, subconscious safety net that he could always go back, that the door was unlocked, that the country was his. But the deprivation order had locked the door, and it had changed the locks. He was now a guest in his own history, a visitor in the land of his mother's grave. And the white slip of paper in his pocket was the physical manifestation of his exile. It was a receipt for his birthright. William's reaction to the Heathrow arrival was characteristically pragmatic. He received the border log update on his secure device while sitting in his office at Kensington Palace. He read the entry. Sussex, H admitted. Leave to enter for 5 days. Conditions applied. William set the device down. He felt no joy. He felt no vindication. He felt only the cold, settling arithmetic of the institution. The vulnerability had been neutralized. The Foreign Commission had been quarantined. The line of succession was clean, secure, and entirely contained within the borders of the island. George, Charlotte, and Louis would inherit a monarchy that was legally insulated from the commercial and diplomatic liabilities of their uncle. The crown was safe. The cost was Harry's passport. And William, like his father, like his grandmother, understood that the crown always demands a cost, and the crown always collects. Catherine's perspective, as always, was focused on the narrative architecture. She understood that the stripping of Harry's citizenship
was the ultimate, irreversible resolution to the Megxit saga. As long as Harry was a British citizen, the British press would treat him as a domestic political issue. They would debate his taxes, his security, his grievances, and his right to return. But a foreign national on a 5-day business visa is not a domestic issue. He is an international footnote. By becoming an alien, Harry had inadvertently solved the palace's greatest PR problem. He had made himself legally irrelevant to the British public. The tabloids could no longer claim he was draining the British taxpayer, because he was no longer a British subject. The Republicans could no longer claim he was a victim of the British establishment, because he had legally renounced the establishment to serve a foreign corporate entity. The narrative was dead. The law had killed it. But what of the future? What of the long-term geometry of the Windsor family? The stripping of Harry's citizenship has created a permanent, unbridgeable chasm between the core and the periphery. Archie and Lilibet, though they retain their theoretical right to claim British citizenship by descent, are now the American children of a foreign national. They will grow up knowing the UK only as a place their father visits on a stamped visa. They will not understand the weight of the Act of Settlement. They will not understand the history of the Privy Council. They will understand only that their father is an American businessman, and that the island across the ocean is a place that requires a white slip of paper to enter. The generational severance is absolute. The bloodline continues, but the legal lineage has been amputated. Harry's legal team in Beverly Hills has spent the last 2 months desperately trying to find a workaround. They have consulted constitutional scholars at Oxford. They have consulted immigration barristers in London. They have explored every possible avenue to restore his right of abode without triggering the collapse of the $400 million foreign contract. The consensus among the experts is uniform and bleak. There is no workaround. The only way to restore his British citizenship is to formally renounce the Foreign Commission, which would trigger a catastrophic breach of contract and potential criminal liability. The only way to keep the money is to remain an alien. Harry chose the money, and the state has honoured his choice. Charles's with the deprivation is a private, silent thing. He does not speak of it. He does not mention it to his courtiers. But those close to the king have noticed a subtle shift in his demeanour. When he walks in the gardens at Sandringham, when he looks out over the Norfolk estate that his son will never inherit, there is a stillness about him. The stillness of a man who knows that the law has done what love could not. The law has drawn the boundary. The law has protected the institution. But the law cannot comfort a father who knows that his son is now a stranger in the land of his birth. In the quiet hours of the morning, when the castle is asleep, and the weight of the crown feels heavier than it ever has before, what does this story tell us about the monarchy? It tells us that the institution is not a family. It is a legal entity. It is a corporation of state, governed by ancient statutes, unforgiving precedents, and the cold, mechanical application of the law. You cannot negotiate with the Act of Settlement. You cannot charm the British Nationality Act. You cannot use a Netflix documentary to rewrite the Privy Council's registry. The institution survives because it places the survival of the state above the feelings of the individuals who inhabit it. It survives because it is willing to let its own blood walk out the door and then lock the door behind them, if that is what the law requires. Harry walked out the door. He signed the oath. He took the money. And the institution, without malice and without hesitation, locked the door. It tells us that the hardest thing a prince can do is not to wear the crown. It is to realize that the crown was never his to take with him. Harry believed that he could strip away the titles, the duties, and the expectations, but keep the fundamental privilege of his birth, the right to be British. He believed that his citizenship was an inherent trait, like his eye colour or his height. But citizenship, in the architecture of the British state, is not a trait. It is a contract. It is a bond of allegiance. And when Harry swore that allegiance to a foreign power to secure his commercial empire, when Harry, acting as the enforcer of the contract, simply executed the penalty. The penalty was exile, not a dramatic, cinematic exile, a bureaucratic paper exile, an exile enforced by border guards, visa slips, and the quiet scratching of a Home Secretary's pen.
It tells us that William's vision for the future has been realized, not through his own maneuvering, but through his brother's ambition. William wanted a secure, unambiguous line of succession. He wanted the vulnerabilities eliminated. And Harry, in his pursuit of a $400 million corporate shield, handed the state the perfect, legally unassailable mechanism to eliminate himself. The deprivation order was the final lock on the door of the slimmed-down monarchy. The core is now impenetrable. The periphery is legally barred from re-entry. The cost was a brother's passport. But the institution stands. And in the calculus of the Crown, the institution is all that matters. And it tells us that Harry's journey has reached its final, irrevocable destination. He is no longer the rebel prince. He is no longer the spare. He is no longer the exile who might one day return to reclaim his place. He is an American, a wealthy, influential, legally shielded American. He has his fortress in Montecito. He has his media empire. He has his foreign commercial partners. And he has his US passport. And when he travels to the country of his birth, he will stand in the queue. He will hand over his dark blue book. He will receive his white slip of paper. He will be told not to overstay. And he will walk into the country not as a prince returning home, but as a visitor passing through. And the border will hold, and the law will stand, and the registry will remain closed, and the ink will dry, and the history will be written, and the future will belong to those who stayed. What do you think? Was the Home Secretary right to execute the deprivation order and strip Harry of his citizenship based on his commercial oath to a foreign entity? Does the Act of Settlement need to be modernized to account for global corporate structures? Or is its rigid, ancient enforcement exactly what protects the Crown from foreign influence? Should William have intervened to find a diplomatic workaround that allowed Harry to keep his citizenship while neutralizing the security threat? Or was the clean legal break the only viable option for the monarchy's survival? And how will Archie and Lilibet view their father's choice when they are old enough to understand that he traded his birthright for a corporate shield? Tell us in the comments below. We read every one, and this story, more than any we have covered, demands the community's judgment. If you want to stay ahead of the royal stories the mainstream media will not touch, make sure you are subscribed to Crown Watch. Turn on the notification bell. Share this with someone who understands that the most devastating exiles are not enforced by armies or walls, but by fountain pens, corporate contracts, and the quiet bureaucratic machinery of the state. Because in the House of Windsor, the blood is the history, but the law is the border, and when the blood and the law conflict, the law always wins. Stay curious, stay informed, stay questioning, and remember, every oath is a contract, and every contract has a cost, and every cost has a border at the end of it.
Until next time, keep your eyes on the registries, and your hearts open to the ones who cross the border and can never truly come back. Goodbye.